Virel Prime was once a peaceful world, a shining example of what the Galactic Concord had hoped to build across the stars. A colony full of life, calm skies, and soft green landscapes. The Virelans, its native species, were kind and intelligent, their long limbs and delicate skin built for art, science, and harmony, not war. Their society had never known invasion, never needed weapons more powerful than a simple pulse shield. But peace, as many in the galaxy had learned too late, does not last forever. From the edge of known space came the Draxel swarm, an ancient hive-mind race of insect-like creatures driven not by greed, not by ideology, but by hunger and instinct. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply arrived, consumed, and moved on to the next world. And now they were on Virel Prime. At first, the Virelan defense grid tried to hold them off. Energy cannons, basic orbital beacons, and civilian evacuation drones launched in a rush. But the swarm was too many. Tens of thousands poured down in living clusters, darkening the skies, ripping into cities like a wave of claws and acid. The planet's capital, Lissari's heart, quickly became the center of a brutal siege. Glass towers burned. The song bridges, once used for gentle skywalks, now cracked and twisted under the weight of panicked civilians and collapsing structures. Virelan screams echoed across the broken city. Desperate, the Planetary Council sent a distress call to the Galactic Concord. Within a day, several allied species arrived. The cautious Galari, floating inside their exotanks, the armored Harkoon, slow but sturdy, and even a few elite Dravari scouts. They set up defense lines, used precision strikes, and tried to calculate swarm patterns. But for every Draxel they burned, 10 more arrived. The Draxel were evolving. They were adapting. Every hour the losses grew. Medical ships ran out of space, rations ran low, and hope began to die. In the Concord Command Center, buried deep under what remained of Lissari's heart, the mood was grim. Holograms of the battlefront showed flashing red zones creeping closer to the inner city. Alien officers argued. The Galari wanted to retreat and regroup on a nearby moon. The Dravari believed a full retreat was the only option. The Harkoon stood silent. They would fight to the last, but even they knew the end was near. That was when the Virelan ambassador, thin and trembling, rose from his seat and whispered a name none of them expected to hear. Earth. The room fell quiet. For a moment no one spoke. Then came the objections. You mean the humans? One Galari commander said, his voice filtered through fluid. They're unstable, reckless, dangerous. They don't follow proper war code, added another, her eyes glowing dimly. They improvise, they destroy things that can't be replaced. But they win, said the Harkoon general, speaking for the first time. All eyes turned to him. I've seen them fight, he continued. When they believe in the cause, there's no force like them. If we want to save Virel Prime, we call them. Still, many hesitated. The humans had only recently joined the Concord and were often kept far from sensitive missions. Their world, Earth, was classified as a death world, a planet so dangerous that most species could not survive there even for a day. Its gravity was intense, its weather violent, its creatures terrifying. Even the humans themselves had evolved in a constant state of survival. It made them strong, yes, clever, adaptable, and fast, but also unpredictable. Some Concord leaders called them a weapon that was safer kept locked away. But the Virelan ambassador looked at the growing red lines on the map, felt the floor tremble as another blast shook the city, and spoke again. We are already dying, he said. If there is any chance left, it lies with Earth. Within the hour, a long-range signal was sent. A priority-level request to Terran Command. Coordinates, status reports, and the bleak reality of the siege were all included. The alien officers watched the sky nervously, unsure of what response would come, if any. 3 hours later, sensors picked up 3 Terran ships dropping out of warp near the moon's orbit. No warning, no grand speech, Just three massive, dark metal warcraft gliding into position, surrounded by clouds of magnetic, shielding and long-range rail batteries. Their codes checked out. 5th Terran Expeditionary Force. The humans had answered. And as the Draxil swarm pushed harder into the capital, unaware of the new arrivals above the atmosphere, something shifted in the war room. No one dared say it aloud, but it was there. A feeling that perhaps just maybe the tide was about to turn. Not because of numbers, not because of technology, but because the humans, the Deathworlders, were coming. And wherever they went, they didn't just survive. They fought back. The sky above Virel Prime shifted as 3 massive Concord ships broke through warp space, their black hulls marked with the unmistakable insignia of the Terran 5th Expeditionary Force, a symbol feared by enemies and barely tolerated by allies. Inside the command chambers of the other alien fleets, tension grew. These were not ordinary reinforcements. The humans had arrived, and even though they came as allies, their presence brought a chill to every room. The first visuals confirmed what the rumors always suggested. Human soldiers wore thick, battle-worn armor that looked more like walking tanks than uniforms, with scorch marks and field repairs still fresh. Their helmets reflected no light. Their weapons looked oversized, and their movements were too confident for newcomers to a dying battlefield. While other species relied on precision and distance, the Terrans believed in force, raw, aggressive, and overwhelming. Captain Mara Vance, leader of the human battalion, stood inside her dropship, calm amid the turbulence. The screen in front of her displayed a red map of Virel Prime's surface, showing the swarm lines closing in on the last Virelan stronghold. She studied the data with cold focus and muttered with a hint of dry humor. Draxil swarm? Good. I was starting to get bored. Around her, the rest of the unit double-checked their gear. Flamethrowers hissed softly. Railguns clicked into place and sonic disruptors powered up with low hums. No one in the ship looked worried. No one hesitated. To them, this was just another day on duty. The dropships disengaged from the conquered carriers and dove hard through the planet's atmosphere, their descent leaving fire trails behind them like falling meteors. The alien defenders on the ground saw the burning crafts tear through the clouds and feared for a moment they were under attack again. But when the ships hit the ground with earth-shaking force and human troops stormed out in synchronized formations, the battlefield changed in an instant. The Draxil swarm had been advancing confidently, their tide of claws and acid barely slowed by energy shields or drone strikes, but they paused the moment the first Terran unit opened fire. Flamethrowers roared like dragons, cutting down clusters of Draxil and walls of fire. Sonic disruptors shattered the air with pulsing waves, throwing enemies off balance, rupturing sensitive organs. Railguns punched holes through thick exoskeletons, as if they were paper. The swarm was fast and brutal, but it had never seen weapons like these. It had never seen soldiers who didn't run when outnumbered, who charged toward danger, not away from it. For the first time since the invasion began, the swarm faltered. The Draxil were not used to enemies who hunted back. In the command center, alien officers watched in stunned silence as human units pushed forward through areas previously lost to the swarm. Their movements were coordinated but fluid, adjusting in real time, using rubble as cover and moving like creatures born for chaos. One Virelan engineer whispered in awe, "They don't fight like us. They fight like they were made for this." Captain Vance and her squad reached the outer city ruins where a Concord defense line had collapsed just hours earlier. Smoke hung heavy in the air, buildings burned, and wounded aliens cried for help. Without hesitation, human medics split off and pulled survivors to safety while the main group set up rapid-fire suppression zones. Vance raised her rifle and fired at a leaping Draxil warrior, then barked orders over comms to coordinate with a nearby Harkoon squad. To the aliens, the humans seemed almost reckless, but every move had purpose. Every risk, a calculation. It wasn't just bravery, it was experience. These soldiers had grown up on a world where everything tried to kill them, predators, storms, even diseases, and somehow they had learned to adapt, to overcome. The Draxil came in waves, but the Terrans held the line. Flames danced in the streets and thunder echoed as railguns fired in rhythm. A new kind of fear spread through the swarm, something alien to their hive mind: hesitation. As the sun dipped behind the smoke-filled horizon, the battlefield looked different now. Once, it was a place of retreat and desperation. Now, it felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. The Draxel had walked into something they didn't understand. They had faced many enemies before: scientists, diplomats, warriors who followed rules and formations. But these humans were not the same. They were not prey. They were something else entirely. And as night fell over Varel Prime, lit by the distant glow of burning wreckage, the swarm began to pull back slightly, a ripple of uncertainty passing through their ranks. In orbit, aboard the Terran flagship Iron Rain, more dropships prepared to launch. Reinforcements were coming. The full strength of Earth had yet to be unleashed. But already, one message was becoming clear across the Concord battle net, repeated, in hushed tones and urgent reports: the Deathworlders are here, and the swarm is bleeding. The battlefield of Varel Prime had changed since the humans arrived, not just in tactics, but in energy. Where fear once ruled, now came force. Human squads advanced across ruined streets, clearing nest clusters, and reclaiming lost ground faster than any Concord species thought possible. Their speed was not careless but calculated, their methods unpredictable yet terrifyingly effective. Unlike other armies who preferred distance and order, the humans moved in tight groups, adjusted on the fly, and charged headlong into situations that others would retreat from. The aliens observing from orbit watched with a strange mix of admiration and dread, for the Terrans did not fight like soldiers from peaceful worlds. They fought like survivors who had never known anything but struggle. But just as momentum began to shift in favor of the defenders, the swarm answered with a move of its own. Deep in the hive cluster, buried under what was once a forest, a new signal surged, and the earth trembled. Rising from the scorched remains of a breeding chamber, the Draxel Queen emerged. Unlike the earlier forms, she was massive, towering over the battlefield, her armor plated and pulsing with bioluminescent veins. But it wasn't just her size that made her dangerous. This queen was different, faster, more intelligent, and connected to her swarm through an advanced telepathic link that allowed real-time coordination across miles. Draxel movements became sharper. Traps were set. Ambushes grew more precise. Even the bravest of the alien defenders began to feel the pressure as waves of evolved Draxel units began to push back. For the first time since the humans had landed, the line began to waver. Reports flooded in, Terran squads isolated, casualties mounting, and swarm tunnels opening in unexpected places. Captain Mara Vance stood near the front line, her boots coated in dust and her armor marked from near-constant battle. She scanned the tactical map hovering above her gauntlet and saw the shift. The enemy had adapted. Her eyes narrowed, and, without waiting for permission from Concord Command, she tapped her comlink and opened a secure line to orbit. Her voice, calm and unwavering, carried the weight of what she was about to unleash. TSV Iron Rain, this is Captain Vance, she said. Target Hive Cluster 5. Confirmed Queen emergence, permission to burn the sky. A moment of silence followed, then came the reply. Confirmed, Captain. Coordinates locked. Sky burn authorized. High above the clouds, the Terran warship Iron Rain adjusted its orbit, its magnetic rails extending and charging with a deep hum that echoed across its decks. Below, the human forces pulled back slightly, not out of fear, but to make space. Then, without warning, the sky cracked. Open. Massive rods of tungsten accelerated from orbit with kinetic force alone rained down from the heavens. There were no explosives, no chemical reactions, only speed, weight, and gravity turned into a weapon. The impact was immediate. Thunder shook the entire region. The first strike obliterated a swarm nest, sending shockwaves that flattened trees and structures alike. The second hit closer to the Queen's location, tearing open the ground and exposing the tunnels beneath. The third and largest landed directly atop the hive cluster. A blinding flash lit the sky, followed by a wave of dust and debris that rolled out like a storm. The noise was deafening. From miles away, soldiers, human and alien, felt the quake in their bones. The Draxel Queen, caught in the center of the strike zone, let out a shriek so loud it was felt more than heard. Her psychic link stuttered, then broke, causing chaos within the swarm. Units froze mid-charge. Others turned on each other in confusion. Without her guidance, the organized push crumbled. From the Concord Command Center, stunned officers watched the scene unfold. No weapon in the Concord arsenal had done what the Terrans just did. This wasn't just a strike, it was a message. Earth did not send peacekeepers, it sent an answer. On the battlefield, Captain Vance gave a short nod, then motioned her troops forward. "Let's finish it," she said. With the swarm disrupted, and the Queen wounded beneath rubble and fire, the Terrans pushed in with renewed force, clearing out what remained of the outer hive defenses. Behind them, Concord soldiers slowly advanced, still shaken but following the humans' lead. In one moment, the impossible had become possible, because the Deathworlders had shown what it meant to fight without restraint. And far above, aboard, the Iron Rain, the ship's crew watched as smoke curled upward through the atmosphere, marking the end of a chapter and the beginning of something far more dangerous. Because the Draxel had seen the power of Earth, and Earth was just getting started. The battlefield was a wasteland of smoke, broken steel, and scorched earth. But the fight was not over. Though the orbital strike had devastated the hive and crippled its outer layers, the Draxel swarm refused to fall. Even with the Queen injured, her psychic signal weak and flickering, the remaining swarmlings rallied in frantic defense, as if driven by instinct to protect what remained of her mind. The Concord Command Center received no further updates from the Terran forward units. Human transmissions had gone completely silent. At first, the aliens thought it was a tactical blackout, standard procedure during infiltration missions. But as the minutes dragged on with no sign of movement, the mood shifted. Tension grew thick in the control rooms. Eyes stayed fixed on lifeless screens, on maps with frozen blue markers, on vitals that had either flatlined or gone into deep shadows. Some feared the worst, that even the humans, with all their brutal skill and unbreakable resolve, had been lost in the tunnels. Outside, the Draxel began swarming again, moving strangely, not organized but erratic, aggressive, as if driven by pain or confusion. It was clear something was happening deep beneath the surface. Then, just as hope was beginning to fade, the ground near the collapsed hive cracked open with a low, distant rumble. A second later, a controlled explosion blew away part of the debris, and a group of figures stumbled into the light. It was the Terran infiltration team. Their armor was battered, scorched black, and streaked with dried biofluid from hive creatures. Half of them were injured, limping, dragging teammates, or held upright by exosuit supports. But they were alive. And more than that, they were victorious. At the front of the group, one soldier raised a sealed containment box. Inside, glowing with a dull blue pulse, was a cracked and severed telepathic node, the organic command relay of the Draxel Queen. The moment the Queen's node surfaced, the effect on the swarm was immediate. Across the battlefield, Draxel units began to freeze, screech, or fall to the ground, their connection severed. Some turned on each other, confused and wild without command. Others simply collapsed, twitching, as if part of them had died the instant their Queen's signal vanished. The entire swarm, which had been such an unstoppable force only hours ago, was suddenly falling apart. In the chaos, human medics rushed forward, not only to rescue their own, but to treat conquered wounded as well. Soldiers from every species watched as the Terrans moved swiftly from crater to trench, patching injuries, stabilizing the fallen, and dragging survivors to safety. There was no pride in their eyes, only focus. No victory celebration, only the quiet efficiency of those who had seen too many wars. Captain Mara Vance stood at the edge of the crater, her armor cracked at the shoulder, her expression unreadable, as she spoke into her comm. "Command, this is Vance," she said. "Hive command is down. Queen is neutralized. Suggest mop-up operations commence. Virel Prime is secure." The message spread like wildfire across the conquered fleet. Relief washed over the command rooms, over civilians hiding in shelters, and over the injured soldiers who had been clinging to life in hope of news. It was over. The planet had been saved. The swarm was broken, and at the heart of it all stood the Deathworlders, bruised, bloodied, but unshaken. Around them, the sky began to clear as smoke drifted away on the high winds. Sunlight touched the battered buildings of Lissari's heart, and the surviving Virelans began to emerge slowly from underground shelters, blinking in disbelief. Their world, their future, had been hanging by a thread, and it was Earth that had pulled it back from the edge. For many in the Conquered, this was a moment of quiet reckoning. The humans had not only fought with unmatched fury, they had done what no other species dared. They had descended into the hive itself and struck at the root. They had vanished into the dark without promise of return, and emerged holding the enemy's brain in their hands. Some still viewed them with caution, unsure of what place such beings had in a peaceful alliance. But others, especially those who had fought beside them, who had seen what they were willing to risk, now saw Earth in a different light. Not just as a new ally, but as a force that could shift the fate of entire worlds. The battle for Virel Prime was nearly done, but its story was just beginning to spread. The fires of war had cooled on Virel Prime, but the weight of what had happened remained in the air like the quiet after a storm. The Draxel swarm was broken, its queen gone, its mindless warriors scattered or destroyed. For the first time in weeks, silence returned to the cities. Rescue teams cleared rubble, engineers worked to restore power and communications, and high, above the world that had nearly been lost, the Galactic Concord called an emergency assembly aboard one of its orbital stations, not to discuss strategy or retreat, but to speak with the humans. The leaders of dozens of species gathered in a shining chamber of glass and crystal, many of them still shaken, some deeply grateful, and others clearly uneasy. They had all seen what the Terrans had done, how they had fought, how they had risked everything, how they had used power that others dared not even imagine. Captain Mara Vance entered the chamber in standard military dress, her armor left behind but her presence unchanged. She stood tall, her expression steady, her eyes clear despite the bruises still healing across her temple. There was no need for long introductions. One Conquered diplomat, tall, elegant, from a race that had not seen war in over 100 years, spoke first, his voice calm but laced with concern. "Your victory is undeniable, Captain," he said, "but your methods, they are dangerous. You risk everything. You fight like you're not afraid to die." The room was silent as all waited for her answer. Vance didn't blink. She looked at the faces around her, species of all shapes and colors, many of whom had never stepped onto a battlefield, never heard the roar of railguns or the hiss of a Draxel drone up close. And then she answered with quiet honesty. "We come from a world where everything tries to kill us," she said. "Our weather, our wildlife, our diseases, even our history. We've been surviving since before. We had cities before we had spaceships. On Earth, survival isn't pretty, it's hard, it's messy, and it teaches you fast that waiting around for help doesn't save anyone. So yes, we fight differently. We take risks. We go in close. We lose people. But when we fight, it's not for pride. It's not for conquest. It's to protect. To protect our own and now, to protect others." Her words settled over the assembly like a calm wave, quieting the lingering doubt. She hadn't spoken of power or dominance or glory. She had spoken of survival, something every species, no matter how peaceful, could understand deep down. One by one, other Concord leaders stood to speak, not with objections this time, but with thanks. From Virel Prime came a special message broadcast across the chamber. The Virelans, whose city had nearly been lost, had officially named their rebuilt capital after the Terran unit, New Lissari Vance. A statue of the fallen human soldiers who had gone underground to sever the Queen's mind would stand at the center, surrounded by gardens planted in the soil where the hive once thrived. It was more than a tribute. It was a statement that Earth had become part of something greater, not by asking, but by earning it. And soon the story began to travel far beyond one system. Across conquered space on outposts and stations, in learning halls and military briefings, people began to speak of what had happened on Varel Prime. Not just the fact that humans had won, but how they had fought. Stories spread of the dropships that came like falling stars, of armor blackened by fire, of soldiers laughing under pressure and pushing forward when logic said they should fall back. They were called Deathworlders, a name once spoken with fear, now spoken with respect. Some called them reckless, others called them brave, but all agreed on one thing: the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. Earth was no longer the strange, wild planet on the edge of conquered maps. It was a warning and a promise. In times of peace, humanity might seem distant, but in times of war, when the darkness grows and the swarms rise and the cities fall, it would be the Deathworlders who would come, and when they did, they would fight not to conquer but to save.